Natasha Floor, and you know what I'm talking about here on my channel right now.
Hi besties, welcome back to the channel. And today's story takes us deep into one of the most controversial Hollywood legal battles currently unfolding. One that merges fame, ego, and privacy in a way that feels both surreal and disturbing. At the heart of this escalating storm is none other than Blake Lively, an actress once adored for her effortless charm and carefully curated image, now entangled in a courtroom conflict that's revealing an entirely different side of her public persona. The case, which began as a creative disagreement involving Wayfair, has turned into a full-blown legal and moral showdown over control, truth, and human decency. And the latest development? Wayfair's attorneys are coming out swinging after Blake demanded that director Natasha Heath hand over his personal home videos, specifically footage of his wife Natasha Heath in labor, giving birth at home, claiming he defied a court order by not producing them. According to Blake, these videos were being withheld, and she has gone so far as to ask the court to impose the most extreme sanctions possible for alleged noncompliance. But Wayfair's lawyers have described her motion as draconian, an overreach not only legally but ethically, accusing her of attempting to humiliate and invade the privacy of Natasha Heath, a woman who has nothing to do with the lawsuit beyond being married to the man she's targeting. They insist the footage Blake wants was never shown to her, that it's deeply private, and that demanding it is a gross abuse of the discovery process meant to dig for truth, not to violate someone's dignity. The situation has reached a point where even observers outside the courtroom are questioning whether Blake's actions reflect desperation more than justice. Because when you strip away the glamour and celebrity context, what remains is a chilling question. How far can someone go in the name of winning? To understand how we got here, let's rewind a bit. The conflict stems from a long and messy history between Blake Lively and Wayfair. Somewhere during the production of a project, Blake claimed that director Natasha Heath showed her a video that made her deeply uncomfortable. A video she described as sexually explicit and inappropriate, allegedly depicting Natasha Heath, Jamie's wife, nude and in an extremely private situation. Wayfair, on the other hand, has consistently argued that this is not true, that the footage in question was simply a short, post-delivery clip showing a mother holding her newborn, a deeply emotional but entirely natural moment, not something exploitative or indecent. What Blake insists was an act of harassment, Wayfair calls a moment of misunderstanding or even manipulation. The entire narrative depends on which version you believe. And now, with this new motion, Blake seems to be doubling down on her own story, using legal power to demand access to footage that has nothing to do with the alleged incident, but everything to do with the most vulnerable and intimate experience a woman can have, childbirth. Wayfair's legal team isn't holding back in their response. They cite Rule 37B, which governs sanctions for violating court orders, and they lay out clearly that Blake's argument doesn't satisfy the law's basic requirements. For sanctions to apply, there must be a clear and unambiguous order, an actual violation of that order, and willful noncompliance or bad faith. None of that, they say, exists here. In their filing, they call her motion draconian because it seeks the most severe form of punishment without evidence that a violation even occurred. In fact, they argue, Natasha Heath already complied fully with the discovery order long before Blake's team even raised this issue. They go further, pointing out two fatal flaws in her motion. First, that she never requested these additional videos during discovery, meaning she missed the legal opportunity to obtain them properly. And second, that the court never ordered the production of all birthing footage in the first place. Only one specific video tied to her original allegation, which was already provided. That video, according to Wayfair, was produced on August 22nd, 2025, weeks before the court issued its order. But instead of accepting that, Blake later claimed that the footage she received was not what she remembered seeing, saying that her memory did not match what was provided. Wayfair's attorneys, particularly Ellen Goff, had described this as an attempt to rewrite reality, accusing her of revising her memory to fit her legal narrative after realizing the evidence doesn't support her claim. And in a way, this dispute has become a fascinating study in psychology as much as law, Because what's being debated isn't just footage, it's perception. It's memory versus material evidence. 2 years after the alleged incident, Blake's recollection may have shifted, consciously or not. But instead of acknowledging that, she's turned her shifting memory into an accusation of deception. Wayfair's filings go so far as to imply that Blake is not searching for truth, but for confirmation, that she's selectively framing her version of events to protect her reputation and reinforce a story that now appears increasingly fragile under legal scrutiny. The more her motions are analyzed, the more her strategy looks like an effort to control the narrative rather than uncover facts. But what makes this situation truly disturbing is the collateral damage, Natasha Heath. She's not a celebrity, not a litigant, and yet she's being dragged into this ugly public fight because of who she married. The footage Blake is demanding is of Natasha in labor, at home, in one of the most intimate and personal moments imaginable. Wayfair's lawyer have argued passionately that handing over that footage would be a severe violation of privacy, saying the court should not allow a powerful celebrity to weaponize discovery to peer into a private woman's body. Their filing reads almost like a moral indictment, stating that the intrusion into the highly sensitive moments of a woman's labor and birth cannot be justified merely on the claim that Lively may find what she claims she saw. They go on to accuse her of overreaching, of asking the court to skip all due process and leap directly to extreme sanctions simply because the existing evidence doesn't align with her claims. And this, they argue, isn't an isolated act. It's part of a pattern. According to Wayfair, this is just one in a string of sanctions motions Blake has filed, all with the same goal, to punish the defense when discovery fails to support her accusations. In other words, whenever she doesn't find what she's looking for, she tries to silence the other side instead. They claim that she's asking for sanctions as a shortcut to victory, trying to eliminate evidence favorable to the defense so she doesn't have to actually prove her case. That's a serious accusation, one that paints Blake not as a victim, but as a manipulator. Wayfair also revealed what actually happened in Jamie Heath's deposition, and the details directly contradict Blake's narrative. Heath testified that the video shown to Blake was not some censored clip from a longer, graphic birth video, but a completely separate short video taken after the delivery, one that showed his wife covered with a towel, holding their newborn, with dim lighting and no exposure. He even explained that the more private and intimate recordings of the birth were stored securely on a thumb drive, never uploaded to his phone, never shared, and certainly never shown on set. If his account is true, it would mean that he was fully compliant with the court's order and that the entire foundation of Blake's sanctions motion is built on a false premise. Legally, the argument becomes clear. You can't sanction someone for violating a non-existent order. There is no directive to produce all footage from the birth, only the one referenced in Blake's own request, RFP number 108, and that specific clip was already turned over. Even if more extensive footage exists, it's irrelevant because the case revolves around what Blake saw on set, not what might be stored privately elsewhere. Wayfair emphasizes that she missed her window to request more material anyway, with the discovery deadline having passed on September 30th. From a legal standpoint, her motion isn't just baseless, it's late. But the larger picture here is what this says about Blake's mindset and strategy. According to Wayfair's team, she's trying to turn this lawsuit into a performance, one where she controls the script even if the facts disagree. The attorneys accuse her of turning a creative disagreement into a story of personal violation, reframing professional disputes as moral battles. Their tone is cutting, implying that this is less about justice and more about preserving her image as someone wronged, misunderstood, and persecuted. And that's what makes their final paragraph sting so deeply. In one of the boldest statements yet, they write, Heath, at the director's recommendation, attempted to show Lively the video. Lively characterizes this as an incident of harassment. As a mother of 4 and an actress who was preparing to shoot a birthing scene for the film, Lively should know better. That line lands like a punch. It accuses Blake, a mother herself, of intentionally mischaracterizing a moment of childbirth as something obscene for the sake of her lawsuit. It reframes her not as a victim of harassment, but as someone exploiting motherhood itself for legal advantage. It's an accusation that pierces through the glossy celebrity image she's maintained for years, the poised mom, the advocate for women, the family icon, and instead paints her as someone willing to trample another woman's dignity to win. And perhaps most damningly, the lawyers end by calling her actions an attempt to cheat to win. Those three words echo far beyond the legal brief. They suggest a mindset, a pattern, a willingness to cross ethical boundaries. And while the judge has yet to rule on this particular motion or the other sanctions Blake has filed, the tide seems to be turning. The patience of the court appears to be wearing thin. And if the tone of Wayfair's response is any indication, the narrative that Blake Lively once carefully controlled might finally be slipping away. Because at this point, this isn't just about a lawsuit. It's about credibility. It's about how far a person will go to maintain their story when the evidence doesn't back it up. And in the glittering yet ruthless world of Hollywood, perception is everything. For years, Blake crafted hers with elegance. But now that image is being stripped apart, piece by piece, in public view, not by tabloids or paparazzi, but by her own words and court filings. The irony is brutal, and the stakes couldn't be higher. This case has become a mirror reflecting not just the battle between two parties, but the darker side of celebrity justice itself, where winning matters more than truth and privacy becomes a casualty of pride. As the dust from the sanctions motion began to settle, the deeper currents of this conflict started to reveal themselves, and what we began to see wasn't just a legal battle, but a full-scale implosion of trust, reputation, and self-control. Blake Lively, who had once projected a clean and measured grace, now stood in the center of a storm of her own making, surrounded by accusations of manipulation, strategic dishonesty, and emotional distortion. The Wayfair legal team, led by Ellen Goff and Brian Friedman, didn't just defend against her claims. They dismantled them piece by piece, exposing contradictions and gaps that painted Blake not as a victim, but as an aggressor cloaked in the language of victimhood. Behind every motion she filed, they suggested, was a calculated move to create a version of events that only existed in her imagination. By the time the hearings reached their midpoint, even neutral observers were beginning to see the cracks. What began as a single dispute over a supposed inappropriate video had now mutated into something much darker, a battle over control, public image, and psychological dominance. Wayfair's attorneys claimed that Blake's actions weren't about truth but about leverage, that her legal strategy mirrored the PR strategies that have defined her Hollywood career: build sympathy, maintain control of the narrative, and never let the truth interrupt the performance. But in court, unlike Hollywood, scripts don't always go according to plan. What made things even more explosive was the tone of the latest filings, which read less like legal documents and more like open indictments of character. They portrayed Blake as someone who weaponizes her own identity as a mother and celebrity, using emotional framing to twist legal disputes into moral outrages. According to Wayfair, her approach was designed to exhaust and intimidate, not to find justice. She wasn't seeking the truth. They said she was demanding obedience. And when people like Jamie Heath didn't yield, she turned their personal lives into exhibits, their private moments into battlegrounds. In the next wave of filings, Wayfair's lawyers expanded their defense to reveal how Blake's team had made repeated attempts to compel irrelevant or privileged information from individuals only tangentially connected to the case. They argued that this wasn't just discovery abuse, it was harassment disguised as legal work. And with every aggressive filing, Blake seemed to lose another sliver of credibility. The turning point came when Natasha Heath herself, who had stayed silent until now, finally decided to speak through a sworn declaration. Her words were brief but powerful. She described the emotional trauma of knowing her childbirth video, something sacred and deeply private, was being discussed, dissected, and sought by a Hollywood actress she had never met. Natasha's declaration described the fear and violation she felt, the sleepless nights, and the disgust at how something meant to celebrate life had been turned into a weapon in a lawsuit. She said she felt dehumanized and that no woman, regardless of who she is or who she's married to, should be forced to share her most vulnerable moments because a celebrity demands it. Those words landed like thunder. They transformed public perception. Suddenly, this wasn't just Blake versus Wayfair. It was Blake versus another woman's dignity. The public narrative began to shift sharply. On social media, conversations that once echoed with support for Blake's courage now began questioning her motives. Why would she want another woman's birth video? Fans asked. What does this have to do with justice? For the first time, Blake's moral framing began to collapse. Her carefully managed PR silence, which once made her seem graceful and strong, now made her seem evasive. As legal commentators and YouTubers started analyzing the filings line by line, patterns emerged, statements that didn't match, recollections that evolved, timelines that blurred. Wayfair's legal team called this narrative drift, arguing that Blake's memory wasn't unreliable by accident. It was being rewritten consciously to keep her claim alive. They said her inability to accept the evidence presented to her wasn't confusion, it was denial. And they weren't the only ones who thought so. Court observers noted that Blake's deposition transcripts revealed a subtle but telling contradiction. When asked about what she remembered seeing, her answers began with confidence but ended in hesitation. She used words like "I think," "I believe," "it seemed," language that suggests uncertainty. Wayfair's lawyers seized on this, turning her own words against her. They argued that if her recollection was uncertain, it could not possibly justify demanding the most private footage imaginable. In their words, the court cannot punish defendants for failing to produce evidence that does not exist or for refusing to violate another woman's right to privacy to satisfy a plaintiff's changing memory. It was an argument that resonated deeply. For once, the law and morality seemed to align against the same person. Meanwhile, Blake's attorneys, clearly aware of the shifting public and legal sentiment, tried to pivot. They argued that their client's motion wasn't about humiliation or spectacle. It was about authenticity. Blake had been traumatized, they said, by what she saw and needed confirmation to find closure. But even that defense felt hollow when contrasted with Natasha's pain. Because in this case, one woman's closure required another woman's exposure. The ethical imbalance was undeniable. As the hearings continued, new filings revealed private messages and production notes that undermined Blake's central claims. One email exchange showed her describing the incident months after it supposedly happened, but her tone was casual, not alarmed. Another showed that she had continued collaborating with the same team she now accused, suggesting that her outrage may have been retroactive. Wayfair's lawyers used this to argue that Blake's lawsuit wasn't born out of trauma, but strategy, that it only emerged once it served a legal or reputational purpose. And this argument gained weight when financial documents and production schedules revealed that she had already begun discussions for new brand endorsements around the same time her allegations surfaced. It began to look less like a case of harassment and more like a case of narrative timing. The more the documents came out, the more her story unraveled. The irony of it all was striking. The actress known for controlling every detail of her public persona was now losing control over the one thing that mattered most, her credibility. The courtroom, unlike a movie set, doesn't allow retakes, and as the transcripts piled up, so did the inconsistencies. Every new motion Blake filed seemed to backfire, drawing more attention to the gaps in her story. Legal analysts noted that her team was leaning more on emotional rhetoric than legal reasoning, a red flag in high-stakes litigation. One commentator even described her filings as scripts disguised as motions, saying they were written for the court of public opinion, not the court of law. And then came the most chilling revelation. A private text exchange surfaced, showing that Blake had confided to a close friend that she needed to find something concrete to justify the lawsuit. That single line became the heart of Wayfair's new filing. They called it proof that Blake's intent from the beginning was not justice, but justification, that she had built a story first and then gone searching for evidence to support it. From a legal standpoint, that's catastrophic. From a moral one, it's devastating. As this new filing circulated, the judge reportedly grew visibly frustrated with the case's direction. In a brief but telling statement, the court reminded both sides that discovery is not a license for intrusion. While not naming Blake directly, the message was clear. Her tactics were pushing the boundaries of acceptable conduct. Behind closed doors, sources close to the defense claimed that Wayfair's lawyers were considering filing a motion of their own, this time to sanction Blake for abusing discovery, for filing baseless motions meant to intimidate rather than to clarify. If that happens, it could turn the tables completely, placing Blake not in the role of accuser, but a violator. The public fallout is already immense. Entertainment outlets that once celebrated her as Hollywood's class act now run headlines like Blake Lively's lawsuit spirals out of control, and from Gossip Girl to legal gaslighter, the shift in tone is undeniable. Public sympathy is no longer on her side. Even her celebrity peers, many of whom have remained quiet, are reportedly distancing themselves. And in the cold calculus of Hollywood image management, silence often speaks louder than denial. Through all of this, Wayfair has stayed remarkably composed. Their filings are sharp but disciplined, clinical in tone, careful to contrast their professionalism with Blake's theatrics. They've even begun framing themselves not as a corporation under attack, but as a guardian of personal privacy, defending the dignity of women like Natasha Heath from exploitation. In doing so, they've turned what was once a PR disadvantage into moral high ground. And that's perhaps the most fascinating transformation of all. The company once accused of enabling indecency now appears to be the one defending decency itself, while the actress who built a career on empowerment and family values is being accused of cruelty and hypocrisy. As the final hearings approach, everyone's wondering how the judge will rule, but one thing is already certain. Regardless of the legal outcome, Blake Lively's image will never fully recover. Because even if she wins on paper, she's already lost the narrative battle, the one she wants. Intrusion. While not naming Blake directly, the message was clear. Her tactics were pushing the boundaries of acceptable conduct. Behind closed doors, sources close to the defense claimed that Wayfair's lawyers were considering filing a motion of their own, this time to sanction Blake for abusing discovery, for filing baseless motions meant to intimidate rather than to clarify. If that happens, it could turn the tables completely, placing Blake not in the role of accuser, but a violator. The public fallout is already immense. Entertainment outlets that once celebrated her as Hollywood's class act now run headlines like Blake Lively's lawsuit spirals out of control, and from Gossip Girl to legal gaslighter, the shift in tone is undeniable. Public sympathy is no longer on her side. Even her celebrity peers, many of whom have remained quiet, are reportedly distancing themselves. And in the cold calculus of Hollywood image management, silence often speaks louder than denial. Through all of this, Wayfair has stayed remarkably composed. Their filings are sharp but disciplined, clinical in tone, careful to contrast their professionalism with Blake's theatrics. They've even begun framing themselves not as a corporation under attack, but as a guardian of personal privacy, defending the dignity of women like Natasha Heath from exploitation. In doing so, they've turned what was once a PR disadvantage into moral high ground. And that's perhaps the most fascinating transformation of all. The company once accused of enabling indecency now appears to be the one defending decency itself, while the actress who built a career on empowerment and family values is being accused of cruelty and hypocrisy. As the final hearings approach, everyone's wondering how the judge will rule, but one thing is already certain. Regardless of the legal outcome, Blake Lively's image will never fully recover. Because even if she wins on paper, she's already lost the narrative battle, the one she wants.